Next up, podcast listeners, we have Go Woke or Go Broke. And it is boycotting Home Depot. So, Georgia faith leaders have decided that they're going to boycott Home Depot over the voting law in Georgia. Black religious leaders representing more than 1,000 churches in the state of Georgia are planning a warning shot for other Republican-led states that are trying to limit voting access. That's what the New York Times wrote. You gotta love that. Limit voting access. An absolute and utter lie by the New York Times. But I still have to read it to make you upset. And here's what they say in the New York Times. A major coalition of black faith leaders in Georgia representing more than 1,000 churches in the state will call on Tuesday for a boycott of Home Depot, arguing that the company has abdicated its responsibility as a good corporate citizen by not pushing back on the state's new voting law. The call for a boycott, led by Bishop Reginald T. Jackson, who oversees all 534 African Methodist Episcopal churches in Georgia, represents one of the first major steps to put significant economic pressure on businesses to be more vocal in opposing Republican efforts in Georgia and around the country to enact new restrictions on voting. We don't believe this is simply a political matter, Bishop Jackson said in an interview. This is a matter that deals with securing the future of this democracy, and the greatest right in this democracy is the right to vote. Home Depot, Mr. Jackson said, demonstrated an indifference, a lack of response to the call, not only from the clergy, but a call from other groups to speak out in opposition to this legislation. While boycotts can be challenging to carry out in ways that put meaningful pressure on large corporations, the call nonetheless represents a new phase in the battle over voting rights in Georgia, where many Democrats and civil rights groups have been reluctant to support boycotts, viewing them as risking unfair collateral damage for the company's workers. So here's the thing. Home Depot is based in Georgia. Because Home Depot did not come out front and center and say, we think that voter law is terrible in Georgia. It's that because they were silent on the issue, because they're a corporation and they're not involved in politics, they're supposed to be selling stuff for your home. That's why they're not speaking out against this or speaking for it. Because they didn't speak out, the Georgia faith leaders have decided, well, we're just going to make sure that they go broke because they're not woke. And so here's NBC News reporting on boycotts of businesses in Georgia over the Georgia voter law. These are the businesses that the faith leaders are going after to make sure that they come out front and center against this new Georgia voter law. And at the end, we have NC Ufat, who's speaking in this interview. She's the COO of the New Georgia Project, the CEO of the New Georgia Project. And she talks about the bill is about voter suppression, the biggest lie on the face of the earth. But we had that clip, and here it is.
And across the internet, growing calls to boycott Delta Airlines, Coca-Cola, and Home Depot, all Georgia-based giants.
The message that I want them to take away from this is that voter suppression is bad for business. It's bad for your bottom line.
So that is the ultimate go woke or go broke. The message we want to deliver to the businesses is that if you don't speak up on this law, we're going to make you suffer financially. And therefore, you better speak up. So here's the thing. Where does that end, right? If they get their way this time with Coca-Cola and Home Depot and Delta, then naturally what's going to happen is every time they don't like a law that's passed, they're going to say, it's your fault, Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola doesn't have anything to do with this. These are elected officials in Georgia. They're duly elected by the people, and they passed this law with the governor. And the governor signed the law. So why are you going after Coca-Cola? Because that's what Marxists do, right? Marxists try to bring down the system and to be able to level the system and to rebuild it in their image, which is, of course, not going to succeed. At least we can only hope. So here's CBS 46 in Atlanta reporting on the religious leaders calling for that boycott. We had that clip, and here it is.
We don't mind boycotting. We will not bend. We will not bow. We will not break. We will not back up. This is our time, and we're ready to boycott and ready to march.
Religious leaders with Georgia's AME Episcopal District called for a national boycott of 3 major corporations on Thursday. Bishop Reginald Jackson asked fellow citizens to stop doing business with Coca-Cola, Delta, and Home Depot for failing to speak out against Georgia's new voting law.
Well, we cannot and will not support companies who do not support us in our struggle to cast our ballots and exercise our freedom.
Oh, don't you feel bad for them? And isn't it interesting that we have this Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson in North Carolina that we've talked about during this podcast, who is black and a Republican, and he's the first black Republican elected as Lieutenant Governor in North Carolina. He doesn't even come close to talking that way, which is poor me. I can't show an ID when I go to vote because I'm black. It's just not possible because of the color of my skin. I just can't do it. I'm not capable of it. And the fact that there are 17 days of early voting in Georgia, oh no, I can't do that either. It's just impossible. It's just not enough time. What a bunch of crap. I'm sorry. There's no other way of putting it. And thank goodness we have good thinking black Republicans who are out there out front speaking against this nonsense. So here's what religious leaders are demanding. Here's what they're demanding. And at the end of this clip, okay, I want you to listen carefully. And if you see it, it's even better. But at the end of the clip, you're going to hear Ed Bastian, Delta Airlines CEO, buckling under the pressure. So here's what the religious leaders are demanding first, and then listen. We have that clip, and here it is.
Religious leaders are demanding the following criteria be met to lift the boycott. Companies must express opposition to Senate Bill 202 in a press conference. They must speak out against similar legislation in other states. They must express support of federal legislation, H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, which would block most state voting laws. And they must support litigation against Senate Bill 202.
When we got a chance to finally see it all put together and had a chance to digest it, as well as listen and hear from the voices of our people about it, we realized that this was restricting.
So that is Ed Bastian, Delta Airlines CEO, who buckled under pressure, which I can't imagine. What was the pressure, right? You're the CEO of this major airline that's based in Atlanta, of course, at that major airport that they have here. I think it's called Hartsfield. I don't recall the exact name of it. Maybe it's been changed since then. I've flown in there many times over the years, but not recently. He runs this major airline, and he buckled under pressure because he's like, well, yeah, I mean, now that they've convinced me, it's just too hard for people to get to the polls, and it's even harder to be able to have an ID, even though in the state of Georgia, part of the law that was passed says that if you can't get an ID because you can no longer drive, or because you can't afford an ID, you cannot afford an ID, Georgia will pay for it. They'll provide you one. You just have to ask for it, and they'll give it to you. So here's what the religious leaders want in Georgia. Oppose Senate Bill 202, that's the Georgia law that just passed. So they want all the CEOs to oppose that bill. Oppose it, or else. Second, the religious leaders want the corporate leaders to speak out against similar legislation in other states. So it's like, well, Coca-Cola, we know you're based in Atlanta, Georgia. But if a similar law were to be passed in another state or were proposed in another state, it's not enough, Coca-Cola. You need to speak out against that bill in the other states as well. And the religious leaders want the corporate titans to support H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 at the federal level. They want H.R. 1, which nationalizes elections. It's a bill that nationalizes elections, okay, and does mass ballot mailing and no voter ID. What could go wrong with all of the illegals that Biden's allowing into the country right now, right? It's like, well, let's bring in as many illegals as we can. Let's relocate them to red states. And then once we do that, let's pass H.R. 1, which doesn't require voter ID, and no excuse voting. I mean, talk about undermining the entire United States government and our Constitution. I mean, so the black leaders in Georgia have taken the Georgia law and expanded it to the United States of America, saying, we want H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 passed, and if you corporations don't do what we say, we are going to not buy your product, and we're going to actually start suing you, saying you're discriminating against us. It's just disgusting. I mean, I'm not really sure what else to call this other than what it is, which is coercion and basically, I think, undermining the United States of America. And so, oh, by the way, they also want this. The religious leaders want support for their litigation against SB 202 in Georgia. In other words, support. Give us money so we can sue to overturn the law. I got news for you. Religious leaders in the state of Georgia, the law isn't going to be overturned. It's just not going to be. You want to know why it's not going to be overturned? Because it is one of the most expansive laws in the United States that make it easier to vote. More easy to vote than just about any other state, easier than Delaware and easier than New York, except for one thing. You actually have to show your ID when you vote. And if you are illegally present in the United States, you can't vote. And if you can't get an ID, they will provide one to you, as we already mentioned. And that is Go Woke or Go Broke, boycotting Home Depot.